what?
That way you can see.
And I'm in the back, so. But this is fun. I hate being the front because it's big. Block out the sun.
He can sit there if he wants to.
Like, we're with the big dogs over here.
I hope I am.
In a good way.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Are you? Good to see you. So far, so good. We're doing better than I deserve. Am I in the right spot? This lady? How you like it?
And I sit with the big dogs.
Now, how are you?
I like that.
Huh?
It's peaceful.
they gonna eat first and then go to the stage? I would think after they eat, let's grab them. They probably don't want to eat with this thing on them. You think, Michael? What do you think? Does that make sense? I don't think they want to eat with a lav mic on.
Plus, I'm live streaming.
Okay, yeah, we don't want to live stream them. Maybe talking at lunch or something, accidentally cut the mic on.
So I'm streaming live to YouTube, Facebook, and Twitter all at the same time from that camera.
Cool. You got it all to work. He said you were having software issues. Anytime you get the software.
I have to get all the speeds matched up
Yeah,
just right. And that's,
this firmware update,
this thing
firmware
is an
update.
amazing camera that can stream HD, but not every service out there can accept the full HD signal. So you've got to set all the levels. You can set it to do it automatically, but it doesn't work very well when you do that.
No,
That's what I was having a problem with. And then I just went ahead and ran a wire because I just didn't. I just wanted to eliminate that as one of the
Yeah, the
problems.
wire
I don't
was a big
think it
problem.
was because I only need like 3 megs up.
that is pretty cool. I mean, wireless like that. That's neat. That's a neat gizmo.
The fact that it can stream straight to like YouTube or something is the coolest feature to me. You don't even have to do what you do. That's it. If somebody comes and needs a feed off the system when they do the press conference, they can plug in here. Did you see on our Twitter post right there?
So, we have one speaker who's sitting at the table. Do you want to mic her now, or what? How do you want to do the miking?
I would wait till they finish eating.
Wait till they finish eating, and then get mic'd?
Yeah.
Okay.
I would. I mean, they could walk back here and do it, or I can walk up there, but it might be better.
It'd be better
Just
for
to the
them.
side somewhere,
Yeah, right.
you know.
Okay. Yeah, he's saying he thinks it'd be better for them to go ahead and eat, and then after that,
You
just
want the
before they
mic
get
on while
on
you're
stage,
eating,
they
I
do the
would
mic.
think. You come back and we'll pin it to you. Y'all can
Because
pin
we're
it.
going to
So they'll just
try
come
to
right.
figure out a smooth transition.
Right.
Are you going to make comments before you invite them up?
I never.
Well, we might need to mic her then. Or we might need to go ahead and put one on her.
Yeah. She needs to, because I don't want her to have to stop eating.
Okay, so mic her now then. Okay, go ahead.
And
That will flip to you.
I don't
Somewhere
have,
you
I
wanna-
have a pocket here and
I'm
here.
trying to think. Can we, let me, do you mind if I touch you
No,
here?
that's fine.
Why don't we hide it? Put it on, and we'll, and let's do this. Let's do this through here, so nobody sees
Oh,
the
that's
cable.
okay.
I'll hide that cable,
Yeah.
and nobody should see it. It'll be right here. And then you're right where it needs to be.
Okay, you turned it off.
It's on but not active. Okay. You don't have to touch anything. We get a battery to run the whole time, but I've got.
And not being.
No, nobody will pick it up.
Okay.
No, it's muted here until I mute. Until I unmute you.
Okay, here they come.
Yeah, that's what I was saying.
Okay.
See there.
Okay.
Okay, now, the other two people are going to be at the same table that she's sitting at, so that we can cue you.
Andrea, look up.
Sorry. Hello, can you hear me? Good afternoon. Hello.
Hello.
Hello, can you hear me? If you can hear me, you need to be quiet. Thank you. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the Birmingham Civil Rights Institute as we celebrate 25 years of service to the community, and we are now part of the Birmingham Civil Rights National Monument, which was created by President Obama in January of 2017. I'm really delighted to see all of you here with us on this occasion, and I think we're in for a special treat with our special guest that I will introduce in a moment. But before I do that, I want to just acknowledge those elected officials who are here among us that I'm aware of, and that would first be Senator Bacchus. We're so glad to have you with us this afternoon. Thank you for being here. And our very own Magic City Millennial Mayor, Mayor Randall Woodfin. Randall Woodfin, Mayor. Thank you for joining us. Are there any other elected officials in the House that I may have overlooked? If not, again, thank you to both of you for being here, and thank you all for coming out on this Tuesday to have a conversation that is a little different for the Birmingham Civil Rights Institute to be focusing on economic issues, but we thought with all that's happening in our district and in our community, and the fact that the Federal Reserve has a new chairman and CEO who has suasion over the Birmingham area and the entire state of Alabama, we thought it would be a timely conversation to bring together those of you who might be interested in these issues and in the comments that are forthcoming. And so we are delighted that you're here. And as I said, this is our 25th anniversary. We've had a series of various kinds of programs, and this is simply one of a number that we've been doing. You may not know, however, that we are also one of 205 Smithsonian affiliates, and that our mission is to preserve and promote civil and human rights to enlighten present and future generations. So today's Economic Forum is a special event jointly sponsored by the Civil Rights Institute and the Birmingham Business Journal. Joel Welker, publisher. Joel, would you stand and be acknowledged? And editor, Ty West. They joined with us today to bring this conversation forward and have helped us to promote it and guide us in working with the business and corporate community. I'm also pleased to say that we are live streaming the event, and it's being seen on all the usual social media outlets. So we have a broader audience that are able to participate than is in the room. And this is really, as I said, an opportunity to highlight the current economic development in our activity in our city, which is considerable, including the activities that are associated with the National Monument designation and the growing interest in cultural tourism, which is happening not only in Birmingham, but in Montgomery, in the South, and indeed all over the country. We also want to highlight the legacy of A.G. Gaston, who lived from 1892 to 1996, so he had almost 104 years of opportunity as the grandson of slaves who was born in Alabama's Black Belt, who later moved to Birmingham, became an entrepreneur, and in 1963, he had more than 500 employees, an annual payroll in excess of $1.5 million, and he made many real estate investments, including the A.G. Gaston Motel, which is actually on this block. Those of you from Birmingham will remember it and be familiar with it. And it was opened in 1956, but it may not be as widely known or understood that the A.G. Gaston Motel is actually the centerpiece of the designation of the National Monument by President Obama. And its restoration is a prerequisite for actually implementing the monument, as you know, Mr. Mayor. And so the restoration is happily scheduled to begin this summer. It's a process of planning, engineering, architectural drawings and designs. And we have, I don't know if the park superintendent, Mr. Peoples, is Superintendent Peoples in the house. We have a new national park superintendent who will be on site for the next several months to get that restoration underway. So we think there's a lot of interesting economic development activity happening right here in our neighborhood, and we are delighted to have a very special guest for this occasion and a 21st century leader who has already made history, Raphael Bostic, 15th Chairman and CEO of the Federal Reserve Bank of Atlanta. Let's give him a round of applause. Chairman Bostic, as
President Bostic.
President Bostic, sorry. President Bostic, or Raphael.
That's even better. That's even better.
President Bostic is is the CEO of one of the 12 regional banks that's charged with providing the nation with safe, flexible, and stable monetary and financial systems. President Bostic's appointment really shattered a 104-year-old racial barrier with his appointment in 2017. He is also a voting member of the Open Marketing Committee and served in the Obama administration as a secretary, an assistant secretary in HUD. And he's currently on leave from USC School of Public Policy and is an economist trained at Harvard and at Stanford universities. We actually met, President Bostic and I,
Please, Raphael.
Raphael. Well, I've known him before he became President Bostic, so if you'll allow me that privilege. Raphael and I met several years ago as board colleagues for an organization called the Lincoln Institute of Land Policy in Cambridge, Massachusetts, and Phoenix, Arizona, and we have been friends ever since. And today, we are fortunate to have this opportunity to have a conversation, a candid conversation with him, and to be followed by Q&A. So as you're listening, I hope you'll have a few questions in mind, and we'll have a conversation for a few moments, and then we'll open it up to the broader group. So my first question for you, Raphael, would be to briefly tell us, if you could, a little bit about the Federal Reserve's role in our economy and your specific role as the president of this region.
Sure. Well, first I want to say good afternoon, everyone. It's really nice to see you all here. It's nice to be here. Andrea, thank you for the invitation. I've known her for a very long time. She's always been a voice of calm and wisdom, and I've really valued your counsel. And the folks here in Birmingham are really lucky to have you. So
thank you.
It's really nice to see you.
Thank you.
And I'll tell you, one of the first people I got in touch with when I got this job was Andrea saying, I want to come here, I want to learn what's happening in Birmingham. I want to engage and make sure that our bank is as much of a community partner as we possibly can be. So we have a branch here, and I should say, all my branch folks, please stand up. Just so you know, we have a lot of folks here, and these guys are central to what we do. And the folks that are standing up are also both staff members and board members. So we have some leadership as well. And I want to thank everyone for their service on behalf of us. Now, what are we trying to accomplish? So we're the Federal Reserve. As you said, we're trying to keep things on a stable and sustainable path in terms of economic performance. And that really reduces to a dual mandate of stable prices, which means we don't want inflation to get too out of control, as well as maximizing employment. And so we do this in a number of different ways. So obviously we do monetary policy, so that's voting on the Fed funds rate and managing some important interest rates that really drive the cost of credit and debt for the broader economy. We're also a bank regulator, So we oversee all state chartered banks and all the big bank holding companies. So we have examiners. I have a staff of about 400 examiners who go into banks and look at the books and review files to make sure that they're operating in a safe and sound manner, so that we avoid or do not repeat some of the excesses that we saw in the last decade. Then we also have a payment system. So what most people don't know is that the Federal Reserve is integral in all transactions in the country. So obviously, you know, there's cash, right? That's called the Federal Reserve note. So that's obviously ours. But we are involved in almost all other transactions as well. So when you buy something at Target or Walmart, you're basically saying, when you give them your credit card or debit card, you're saying, I authorize you to take money out of my account and put it in your account. That does not happen instantaneously today. And so there's a large settlement that happens, I think like twice a day. And that settlement happens along a Federal Reserve backbone, by and large. And so we are involved in pretty much people's lives every moment. And you know, it's always good to have an opportunity to tell people about this, because most folks have no idea that we are providing value on a moment-to-moment basis. And then we also have a branch, a unit called Community Economic Development, that is tasked with engaging with communities to help them achieve the things that they're hoping to achieve. We really view our role as to really promote the broadening of real access to opportunity, and make sure that to the extent that we can, communities have the amenities and the linkages that allow people to do the things they want to do. And that means good schools, that means good job training programs, that means access to capital, it can mean safe streets, whatever it is, because we know that when people live in distressed context or when there's chaos around them, it's much more difficult for them to thrive and succeed. Now, you may ask, why does the Federal Reserve do something like this? Well, it comes back to our mandate of maximizing employment. And you know, I think about this as, when you think about maximum employment, that could be a lot of different things. It could be 2 million people employed, or it could be 10 million people employed. For me, I'd rather be at the 10 than the 2. And so that means that we should really take time to maximize the number of people who are actually employable. Because the more people that are employable, then that's more people that actually can be employed. And 10 million, I think, is a better outcome for our country than 2. And so we're going to use our resources as much as possible to really help the community, all of the communities in the 6th District do better. And the 6th District, by the way, 6 states, all of Florida, all of Georgia, all of Alabama, the southern half of Mississippi, the southern half of Louisiana, and the eastern 2/3 of Tennessee. So it's a large district, it's very diverse, and there's a lot of opportunity here. I think that many of the communities in our district have not reached their full potential, and we want to make sure that as many communities do that as possible. So then you ask, what do I do? And what's my role? So my role is really to make sure that we do all the things that we need to do in-house, that we are smart in our monetary policy, that we're doing our bank regulation in a way that makes sense, that the payment structure and the payment systems are still functional. We have responsibility for that in the Atlanta Bank. And then I want to talk to people, and I want to engage, so to make sure that people understand how the economy is working, how it really works, where there are opportunities, how people need to be thinking about responding to the risks and uncertainties that exist in the marketplace, and then trying to help really engage and get people to understand that the world is chaotic. There's a lot of disruption that happens on a daily basis, but that doesn't mean that the world is hopeless. And I view one of our important roles is to give people a sense that even in the midst of all this, there is some sensibility, and there are things that you can do to get out in front of the change and capitalize on it.
So as you talk about this growth and about the chaos, can you give us a perspective, Raphael, on what you think the rest of 2018 might look like in terms of economic growth? And and beyond? And how would the Southeast, the region that you're presiding over, how would the Southeast compare with Birmingham, for example, and with other parts of the country in this environment?
And so that's a hard question. Mainly because I have no idea what's going to happen in the next 6 months. Right? The way our policy is evolving, I don't really know what our policy is going to be 2 weeks from now. And in that context, it's hard to really predict out like how the economy is going to perform. So let's step back and do a little econ 101, right? So the way you do a forecast is you say, what happened in the past? And you model that out, and you say, okay, these were the relationships, and that led to this outcome. All that assumes that the rules stay the same, that the relationships stay the same. As soon as you start changing the rules and changing them in large and radical ways, then it makes it much more difficult to project forward to anticipate what's likely to happen. So in the world that we're in now, where there's a lot of uncertainty around trade policy, there's a lot of uncertainty around the relationship that we have with our historical allies and partners, there's a lot of uncertainty about who's going to be allowed in the country and who can work and who's not allowed to work. All of these things add uncertainty, and it makes it much more difficult to know who is going to be a winner and who's going to be a loser, who's going to have a chance to thrive and who's going to be left on the sidelines not being able to participate. So honestly, I have no idea, right? And one of the things that we're trying to do, and I talked to my staff about this, don't get too far out ahead of news stories or any of those sorts of things, because many of those things never actually happen. And we need to devote our energy on things that are actually happening. And so try to have our staff, and me included, really avoid being too distracted by a lot of the noise around. So I would say that to start. Then in terms of Birmingham versus the rest of the district, you know, Birmingham is not as vibrant as other places. So you think about Atlanta, you think about Nashville, you think about Miami to some extent. Like, these are places where there's a lot of job growth at rates much higher than what's happening here. The types of jobs that are being created are higher wage jobs than are happening here. To some extent, those places have been able to project themselves more effectively. Now, all that said, Atlanta, Nashville, Charlotte, those places have very similar problems that exist here. Right? So there's a study that happens by the Brookings Institution, and they rank the 50 largest metros by mobility. And they define mobility: if you're born in poverty, what's the likelihood you're going to be able to get out of poverty? Today, Atlanta ranks 50 out of 50. We're at the bottom. Right? 2 years ago, Charlotte was 50 out of 50. They're like 48 now. Right? And so this idea that just because a place is growing, that means that everyone is participating and everyone is doing equally well, that's not right. And so the issues around workforce development, issues around education, issues around small business development, entrepreneurship, all those realities are the same in all of our metro areas. And so there's a real common base that I think we have economically. Here, I think a challenge is like, what can be done to attract that higher tier of jobs that provide higher salaries. But Birmingham is not a radically different place than a lot of the other places that are in my district.
So you had an opportunity today, Raphael, to tour the Institute and to see some of the other nearby iconic spaces, the 16th Street Church, the Kelly Ingram Park. We obviously are telling the story here of social justice and inequity and attempts to be more inclusive and to have everyone given equal opportunity. How is that set of issues intersecting with the work that you and your colleagues are doing at the Federal Reserve in terms of economic development and community development, the issue of equity?
So first, this institute is amazing, right? And I only got 2 hours.
We like that. We like to hear that.
Yeah, no, that's amazing. I only had 2 hours to go through, and I really wanted 5, but I would have had to get up way too early this morning, so that wasn't going to happen. But I'll be back. I would
Good.
definitely be
We'll
back.
welcome you back.
In terms of what we do, you know, I think that equity is part and parcel of pretty much everything we do in terms of how we approach our work. So, and it starts internal, right? So we have three values: excellence, integrity, and respect. And that last one is respect. And respect means we respect everyone. We don't prejudge their ability to contribute or put caps on how much responsibility we're going to give people. And that is at a very baseline level, sort of how we're supposed to go forward. And I will tell you, we got those values before I got here. And the way that it was developed was my predecessor, Dennis Lockhart. He went around to all the offices and had little round tables with them. And so those three words evolved from our staff up. This was not top down, this was really bottom up. So it is really present throughout everything we do, and it's an ongoing struggle to make sure that it happens 100% of the time, but it is in our minds 100% of the time, and that's really important. Then I talked about our community economic development space, and that is really targeted at communities that are not at their potential. And we know that those communities are not randomly distributed around the country, and they're not randomly applied to certain parts of our population. Right? There are segments of our population, there are groups, ethnic minorities, in many instances women, who are disadvantaged, who have it harder. And we want to try to do all we can to make sure there's as level a playing field as we can possibly get. So we're out there trying to make sure that communities do that. And then I will say, for us, we are engaging in the community, not just in community economic development, but also in terms of how we engage and interact with our suppliers. Right? So we've started a pretty significant supplier diversity initiative, and we were not doing so well when this started. We are now #1 in the Federal Reserve System. About 30% of all of our suppliers are minority or women-owned. And it's a pretty tremendous accomplishment. And it's one that I talk about a lot, and we are going to try to export our experience and success throughout the Federal Reserve System. We now have a supplier diversity school that we do, a training program, and I'm trying to have this be applied to other institutions in our district. So I was in Miami, and there were some folks came and said, could you talk to the hospital system to see if there are ways that we can get them to be more inclusive? Because inclusiveness should happen in every aspect of business and every aspect of our interpersonal relationships. And I feel like we're doing a pretty good job in trying to live the values on a regular basis.
Well, that's very encouraging, and I'm curious to know, as I mentioned earlier, that there is this opportunity for development in Birmingham around the civil rights history and the interest in cultural tourism and people gaining greater understanding about an increasingly diverse population across the country. Do you have any perspective on how this community should be thinking about it? I mean, there are people in this room who spend a great deal of their time looking ahead, developing ideas for strengthening this community so that it will be more appealing to visitors. Are there lessons that we could learn based on what you're seeing across the region about, transportation, education, training, just, what do we need to be doing more of to be competitive and to be attractive in that development space?
So those are, I would take that in two pieces. So one, in terms of having this place have a higher profile. I think you've already gone a long way toward that with the affiliation with the Smithsonian. I want to get my passport, so I don't want to leave without my passport and my stamp. And that will go a long way toward helping. I think, when I was in grad school, I took some time away and went to work for a little community called East Palo Alto. I was at Stanford, I went to East Palo Alto. And East Palo Alto, while I was there, my second year there, was the murder capital of the country. It had more murders per capita than any place else. And there's a whole story behind that. It was at the intersection of two highways, so a lot of drugs deals went down in town, and if they went bad, people got shot. That happened for exactly 1 year. 2 years later, when you talk about East Palo Alto, they still call it the murder capital. 10 years later, if you go to the Bay Area, they will think of East Palo Alto in that way. And what struck me was that reputations linger if they're not actively engaged and counteracted. So, I think a lot about if you want to change people's views of you, you actually have to go to them. You have to engage them, you have to reach out, you have to find ways to create a new understanding of who you are that is reflective, is accurate, but that is also compelling. And just going through the Institute here, there's a lot of compelling stuff here. There's a lot to do, and there's a lot that I think the country would do well to have a better understanding of. And so finding ways to lift that up, I think, would be quite powerful. In terms of the city, I should let the mayor talk on this. This is not my thing. But I do think there are real opportunities here. And for me, as I go around, the thing that I see most cities wondering is, how can I have positive energy? How can I have people see energy and excitement and creativity and freedom of possibility? And if you have that and that becomes part of your ethos or how people think of you, young people want to go there. People from all over will want to be a part of that. And so that's always the challenge. Like, how do you create that energy and that buzz that makes it exciting? In Atlanta, we've done it through a lot with Georgia Tech. There's a lot of entrepreneurship that's happening. The city has been pretty aggressive in trying to attract large multinational companies. So we have a lot of headquarters for large companies in Atlanta, and that creates sort of a vibrancy, because you're just people from all over the place, and you don't know who you're going to bump into, and that becomes what the city is. And so, for here, I would say that would be something to look for. And then the second thing, I think, is if you're going to have that appeal, you need to make sure that you have a workforce that is prepared to work in those spaces. So we need to make sure that large segments of the population have the degrees and the technical skills that are going to be needed by the companies of tomorrow. Because we actually have this rural initiative that we're doing as well, a small places initiative. Because if you look at my map, I got a bunch of big cities, and then I got every place else, right? And in that every place else, there's not a lot of vibrancy. There's not a lot of economic activity. So I'm trying to go and talk to them, because if you go to those places, like I was in Muscle Shoals about a couple months ago, and they know that they're falling behind. But they don't know what to do about it. So we try to give them a framework for how to think about it. And one thing that comes up all the time is that if you're an employer, you need to have some confidence that if someone leaves your company, there's going to be someone there to fill that job, right? And if you don't, and in smaller places, part of the problem is just a critical mass. You don't have enough people. So people are like, if it's only 4,000 people, that's not going to be enough. I'm going to run out of people, so I'm not going to invest in those places. In other places, it's, I don't have enough people that have a particular skill set, and there aren't institutions that are really in place to help people get those skill sets if we wanted to. And so there needs to be a thought to, like, what are the assets, what can you deliver in terms of skills, in terms of numbers, and then really try to target some employers and businesses to come here and say, this can be a neat place for you.
Well, I appreciate particularly your earlier remarks about embracing the history and talking about it and sharing it and building on it. I think that the National Monument designation last year really crystallized that action for this community. There was some ambivalence because The history, although ultimately triumphant in Birmingham, was tragic in many aspects, as you saw, for example, when you visited the 16th Street Baptist Church earlier today. That there were very sad aspects to the civil rights struggle that took place here. It was known as Birmingham, and a lot of people, when I first arrived, in fact, said, well, maybe we should just forget about the history and sort of put it aside and say we've had 25 years of success with the Institute, let's call it a wrap and move on. And then the monument momentum began, and the national designation, and a resurgence of opportunity to really take a story that has not only regional and national relevance, but is still inspiring the people across the world, and to reposition that story as sharing lessons learned about how nonviolent social change can take place. And therein lies the power of the transformation, and not burying it, but sharing it. So I appreciate your comment along those lines. I also know that we think of ourselves as a museum of the future about the past. And what that means is that we have to continually revisit the narrative and contextualize it for the issues that young people and others are facing today. So when we did, for example, a reenactment of the Children's March last month, the topics were different than they were 55 years ago, but it was about gun violence and other contemporary issues. But the impulse is the same, and the need is still there. So I appreciate your underscoring the importance of embracing the reality, which is the history, but interpreting it for today.
Yeah, so I wanted to say two things on that. One is it's important to remember that very few things are new in kind. They may be new in the style or detail, right? And so that you could have a children's march and still have issues to deal with, right? 100 years from now, that's still gonna be true.
Absolutely.
And it's important that, and that's why the historical context is so important, reminding people that we've been through these sorts of things before. And the thing I really like about this place is, this place is more about a journey for me. Right? This is about journey from darkness, from hard places, into good places. And that just because you're in a hard place doesn't mean you have to be there all the time. You can actually get to a good place. And it's a struggle. Like there's nothing is easy. Things that are of value, you usually have to work hard for. But don't get lost in that hardness, that difficulty, just to let that translate into a hopelessness, right? So the determination that you see in the walls here as you go through in the exhibits is really about, I know we're in darkness, but I'm not losing hope, I'm not losing faith, and I will push forward. And it reminds me of like my favorite line in the Bible, which is not a line that anyone ever says, but it comes up again and again, and it's do not be afraid. Right? So many key moments in the Bible, an angel or someone is saying, do not be afraid, move forward, do what is asked of you, and have faith that it will work out. And that's what happens here throughout this building, and throughout this city, in a way that is grounded and so ingrained in the fabric of this place, that to give that up, it just seems to me that's giving up something that's precious. And it's something that we should be able to really leverage to help this place be better and help the country be better, because those sorts of messages are things that we need to be saying more often.
Well, in this room, just parenthetically, we're sitting surrounded by profiles of courage, our current exhibit of the foot soldiers, all of whom were alive. One has passed since we hung this exhibit just a couple of weeks ago. But these are profiles of people who indeed demonstrated that courage as young people 55 years ago when they marched and were met with dogs and hoses in the park across the street. So we try to remember that past and lift it up as inspiration and hope moving forward. But I'm curious, as we move forward and you're talking about companies of tomorrow. You, I'm sure, are aware of the developments in the tech sector in Birmingham, and this is becoming increasingly important and a real opportunity. We've had hosted here at the Institute and in the city visitors from the tech community. Tim Cook was here recently from Apple. Steve Case was here from formerly from AOL. We had Mark Zuckerberg here last spring. Tech is leaving Silicon Valley and coming to Birmingham, and we're very excited about that. I wonder if you have any perspective on what you see in terms of the tech sector moving outside of the traditional New York, Silicon Valley, triangle, and how is the workforce prepared, or what should we be thinking about in terms of developing the workforce to service those opportunities?
So I think tech is trying to go everywhere. Everybody wants tech. That's the new frontier of how businesses grow and thrive and become prosperous. And it's fiercely competitive. And I would say Atlanta thinks they're doing it. Augusta, Georgia thinks they're doing it. Savannah thinks they're doing it. Everywhere I go, they think they're doing it. And they all are to some extent. And I think it's important that the aspiration is really present, and energy is being expended to try to be credible in that space. And so I think that's really important. What I would also say is, one thing we've been looking at is the distribution of the money in the space, right? So if you look at venture capital, which is an important source of first dollar money in tech space, a very, very small fraction of that happens in my district, right? Atlanta does better than most, but Atlanta is still a tiny drop in a very large bucket. And so one thing we are trying to do as a Federal Reserve is make sure that the opportunities and the opportunities, yes, but also the innovative things that are happening in our district get more widely known. So we're doing this in education. I go to charter schools. I was in New Orleans. Actually, was in Lafayette, Louisiana. Look at a great charter school that's doing really interesting things. I go to factories. I was at the port in Savannah, really just trying to understand what are the interesting things that are happening that we should be lifting up so that venture capital investors can be aware, right? So, one thing that we have an ability to do that many others don't is to have a broader network as a function of, being in this large network. If you're a small company in a non-New York place, you may not know how to get in touch or get in front of or inspire a venture capitalist. So, we can, be a way to try to create some of that information and information sharing. We can also, to the extent possible, make sure that folks that are trying to do innovative things and do entrepreneurship get vetted early. Right, one of the things that we also engage in is foundations, and foundations also don't spend money proportionate to need in the 6th District. But oftentimes when people go to foundations, they don't ask for things. They don't ask for things in a foundation type way, which minimizes the likelihood that they'll actually get the money. Right, so to the extent that we can help do some translation and be in front of, be a conduit or an intermediary to try to promote more engagement, we're going to try to do those things.
So you mentioned entrepreneurship a number of times. We're, as I said, part of the monument that will be interpreting and helping to bring forward the legacy of a well-known entrepreneur in this community, A.G. Gaston, who lived until the early 1990s and made such a tremendous difference in his impact as an entrepreneur coming out of the Black Belt and deciding that he wanted to be successful and have a career and a pathway forward, and also to help empower others. What is your perspective on minority ownership and entrepreneurship in this region from your perspective at the bank. And is there anything that you would say to this audience about how they should relate to that community and to those ideas and to help minority entrepreneurship in a city which is, by the way, 68%, I think, Mr. Mayor, people of color. Is that correct? 73, thank you. So what should we be thinking about in that regard in this country?
Entrepreneurship is important because it's a second pathway toward self-reliance and self-sufficiency. So the small business, if you run a business, you basically have control of things. You get to dictate to some extent how things are going to play out, how your workers are going to get paid, what types of strategies you're going to pursue. And those are all, that type of self-determination is, it can be incredibly empowering. So I think that's really important. I would say I am not an entrepreneur, right? So I was a professor, I had tenure, right? Tenure means I don't have to create anything, right? So I just have to write a few papers every year. So I'm not the best person to give guidance on what it means to be, what you need to have to be a successful entrepreneur. I do know, though, that you can be trained to be a better entrepreneur. And one thing I worry about, worry is probably too strong. One thing, no, I worry about it, is that a lot of people I worry that people will get into an entrepreneurship environment without having the preparation to be ready to deal with the ups and downs that happen in that space. Small businesses that's complicated. Right? There's a lot of chaos. You're small, you don't have a lot of extra capital. You're going to have to be extremely nimble and be very good about assessing a situation and then making a decisive decision about how you're going to get to a different place. Right? There's training that can help you work through those processes, and I worry that not enough, particularly minority small business people, are in that space. One other thing I will say on this is I think there needs to be a conversation about what it means to be a small business. So in Atlanta, I think the statistic is something like 90% of all minority-owned small businesses have 1, 2, or 3 employees. Right? That is a different type of small business than even a 10-person operation. And so trying and a 10-person operation is going to be more resilient, it's going to be able to be more impactful in the community. And so trying to have some conversation about how we get our small business community to be more diverse in its scale so that it is collectively more resilient, I think is really important. And I don't know where that conversation starts, but I think it's an important one because I think there are some opportunities to get to a broader scale and actually broaden the base of economic strength in the community.
Well, I think there are lots of young entrepreneurs who are emerging here, and we'll stay tuned as they continue to evolve and develop. I'm going to ask one more question, and I want to open it up to all of you to get your questions ready, and we'll have a mic circulating. And the last question really is, again, revisiting the fact that you are the first ever president of a Federal Reserve Bank, and I'm wondering if how you think about that. Does that change the way you do your job, or is the role of the Fed in a diverse region of the country?
So the one thing that has changed is that I allow myself to be in selfies now, and I never used to do that, so I stayed out of selfies. That's true. I'm not saying that as a joke. What I would say is, it does not change how I do my job or approach my job. I've got to be an excellent president. That's my job. And that's first and foremost, and that would be true regardless of what I look like, regardless of where I came from or any of those sorts of things. And if I don't do that well and I don't stay focused on that, then it will be a failed experiment. On the other hand, it's a big deal. And I understand it's a big deal. I will tell you, when I got named, I got emails from all over the country, from people I did not know at all, talking about how excited they were, how it changed their understanding of banking and finance, and it was pretty daunting. Right? It was emotional, it was moving, and it was exciting. And when I go around, I see, and it's in my building, but also when I go touring around, people are excited. They're like, I know who you are, and you have changed things in a pretty significant way. And I don't want to put any dousing on that excitement. I don't want to say, oh, I don't really think about this, so just stop talking about it. And that's why I do the selfies. Because I want people to revel in the excitement. I want them to think about the possibilities and see themselves with possibility. And so that's why I do that. But it's kind of a surreal experience to have people just walk up to you and want to have pictures taken. It's a funny thing, but it's really great. And I will say that my experience through year one has been top notch. It's been really outstanding, and I get to do things like this, which is just wonderful.
Well, I'm very glad you're here, and you saw some of the young people this morning who are working in our legacy program, and they were giving tours, and it certainly has been an inspiration for them to see people like you in the position that you're in, and who knows how they might be inspired. We may be sitting here, or someone, I won't be here, but others will be sitting here 20, 30 years from now, and they will be in a similar role because they've seen you and they know that anything is possible if they work hard and stay focused on what they are trying to accomplish. So with that, I'd love to open it up to questions, and we have a mic if need be so everyone in the room can hear the question.
Yes, first I'd like to get a selfie with you afterwards.
Right.
So opportunity zones is a real popular topic in economic development, especially as a way to create private investment in low to moderate income areas. What's your thoughts on opportunity zones and the best way we can leverage opportunity zones?
So getting private capital, let me step back and say, there needs to be private capital invested in our communities, right? Because the public sector by itself is never going to have enough money to do all the things that we need to have done. The question is sort of what is the nature of the flow of that private capital? Who has a voice on how it's deployed, and who gets to participate in the gains from it. All right? And those are all things I think that need to be part of the conversation at the local level and say, look, we want private capital, but we don't want it to be in such a way that it displaces all of the folks who have historically been here, where all the returns that are generated by our activity and engagement in it goes to other places and other communities. And so we want some commitments in that regard. And I'm not an expert on the opportunity zone legislation to know exactly what you can and can't do in that space. But I think that needs to be a real important part of the conversation, that there's an expectation that by creating these opportunities need to be inclusive in terms of who benefits from them. And I think that's the most important thing.
Yes.
I yield to the mayor.
It's hard to give. Mr. Bostic, thank you so much. The pillars you spoke of about the goals the Feds has in regards to, particularly the last one around economic development and workforce development, I'm glad to see you all in that space. In regards to your 6 states, access to capital, workforce development, and support of small business. Can you share with us the best example and/or best practices you've seen in the year you've been in your leadership position?
So I'm going to defer that question. We actually have reports that do them far better justice than I will. What I will say is there are some good workforce development programs. One area that I think we don't do enough of is seeing partnerships between larger employers and the community colleges or the college system. Right, so if you have larger employers, many of them already know where they're going to be short workers. They already know where they're struggling to find people with the skills that they need. I think they should seriously consider creating the pipeline themselves, like taking the initiative, talking to educational institutions, and finding ways to create programs so that that pathway becomes just turnkey, so that you're always going to have people that are available. And I think ultimately that's a way to increase the broader skill base for the region. So even if those workers don't go to the company per se, they're going to go someplace else, or they will start to create an appeal that might attract some other employers that require similar skills. So that's something I think is interesting that can be of value. But I will get you reports on the other stuff for sure.
A hardy perennial in urban discussions now is the issue of revitalizations of cities and affordable housing. And I recall during the Civil Rights Movement that the Federal Reserve, along with other regulators, had a pool of money as a part of the Urban Reinvestment Task Force for housing. My question is, where do we stand in terms of the investment that the Reserve has in such initiatives?
So we don't, so I'm not familiar with that fund at the Fed. We don't have money to do those things. All right, so in general, we don't give out grants. We don't do programs per se. We can facilitate technical assistance. I have experts on my staff in various areas. I have an expert who works on affordable housing. I don't know if you saw, there was a study on eviction in Atlanta that came out of our shop, and it triggered a whole host of new conversations around eviction throughout the Southeast, which have been quite powerful and helpful. So what we try to do is use our expertise in that space. In terms of affordable housing, I will say that I have been surprised about how consistent affordable housing has come up as a challenge. So I came here from Los Angeles. Right? Los Angeles is gigantic. There are way too many people, and there aren't enough units. I knew there was going to be an affordable housing problem there. When I came to Atlanta, I thought, it's Atlanta. This is a smaller place. They couldn't, but they face the same challenges. But what has also been true, I was in Knoxville, Tennessee. They have the same problem. When I came here last time, I heard a lot about the affordability problems here. It's something that is more pervasive throughout the district, and it's something that I think is an important challenge. When we think about housing, there are really two pieces to this. One piece is the supply side. Right, so on some level, if housing is too expensive, that probably means there are more people chasing the housing than there are houses. Right, so it becomes an auction, and then you bid up the price, and the price is going to be higher. So we need to be thoughtful about what areas and what communities do we have shortages in just a number of units, and then find ways to increase that supply. That is a local land use issue. Right, so that's the Planning Commission, that's through the mayor, that's City Council, making decisions about where they're going to allow housing to be built and where they're not going to allow housing to be built. And then what kind of housing and at what densities, all that kind of stuff. So that's a distinct supply side conversation. But when you think about affordability is actually a ratio. There are two numbers involved. There's the cost of housing, and then there's the income that you make, right? And so we also should not ignore the income side and see if there are ways that we can get people to have jobs that pay better wages because they provide better value add. And so we need to be thinking about both of those. And I will say, like in California, there are many parts of the Central Valley, that's where most of the farming happens, where it's an income problem, not a supply problem. If you talk to developers, there's a minimum price that you have to charge for rent. And it's a function of the wood, the land, the labor, all that kind of stuff, right? And once you run all that, you put a 10% profit or 15%. That tells you what the lowest rent you can possibly do is. If that lowest rent is still higher than the wages that people can pay, then there's nothing the developer can do. There's nothing a builder can do. It's all on the income side. And so we need to so in every community, the diagnosis can be different. Right? And so we need to step back and say, is this a supply issue? Is it an income issue, or is it both? And then that can trigger a whole set of approaches or strategies that you might want to get behind.
Mr. Bostic, are you in a position, or is the Fed in Atlanta in a position to advise businesses in your district on the impact of the tariffs on their business? I mean that quite seriously. How should we anticipate those tariffs as impacting our businesses?
Oh no, I'll answer it. I'm on record on this already. Oh no, that's a real question. That's a good question. Your costs are going to go up. I mean, for most businesses, if you need steel, the price for steel has gone up by 20–30%. If you need wood, right? So we apply a tariff for Canadian wood. The price for wood, if you talk to any developer, they say is up 30–35%. That's just cost, right? That's extra cost into your production. And so you've got a choice, right? You can either pass that cost on to the people who are buying the goods that you produce, or you can eat it, right? And your profits can go down. What you're seeing is decisions in both those spaces. Now, I think part of what's behind your question, that's the micro, that's for a particular business. There's another piece, which is how broad the scope of these things is, right? So steel and aluminum, as a fraction of the whole U.S. economy, still pretty small, right? So it was a couple $1 billion. We're a multi-trillion-dollar economy, right? So if you think of it at that scale, that's not going to be a huge ripple. If you do auto's big, right? That starts to ripple through a whole lot more and touch a whole lot more people to where it will not be just benign. If you break up NAFTA, right? And you start thinking about supply chains and the ability to produce a whole host of goods, that becomes bigger, right? We got to rediscover the supply chains. We're going to have to, there's a lot of, sort of when I was talking about the uncertainty earlier, there's a lot of figuring out people will have to do. And it's not clear that when they figure out things, whether they'll be better off or worse off, right? Costs will be higher, but business to business and community to community, it's unclear how that will shake out. And I can't predict exactly what's going to happen or who is going to fare better or worse. The disruption is going to be painful, though. I can tell you that. And that worries me, because ultimately we want maximum sustainable prices, maximum sustainable employment, and stable prices, right? The Fed, we like stable. We like slow, steady, no volatility, no uncertainty. We just want it to just go, 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 go. All of this other stuff introduces uncertainty that makes it harder for us to get to that stable, long-run, predictable trajectory. And that's really what we're trying to get to. So our job has gotten a lot harder, but it's the job we have. And so we'll just do the best we can and try to make sure that the economy continues to perform well.
We have time for one more question. Is there one more question out there? Josh?
So President Bostic, thank you for being here. It seems to me that historically the Fed has focused mainly on monetary policy and often was pretty cloak and dagger, was not necessarily out front. But recently, I guess within the last decade, has been more out there, more vocal. But also as a part of that, it seems, has, in your words, and one of the first sets of words out of your mouth were in the business of making people employable. And I think it's a wonderful thing for us to see, and we've benefited a lot from your publications. But can you talk a little bit about, and I realize that a lot of this evolution occurred before you came on the scene, but can you talk a little bit about that that sort of growth in the Fed and its mission?
So we've always had this as part of our business. I think what has changed perhaps is there's been a change in leadership at a lot of the reserve banks, where the folks that have come in have a much closer and deeper appreciation for the importance of engaging in these spaces. And if you look across the 12 presidents, there are some business people, but there are also people who come from more academic aspects. We got one person who was a president of a university. And so that diversity, and I think we're much more, we're very grounded in community and understand that if communities don't work, our job is going to be harder. And so, this is sort of, I grew up, I love cities, I love urban places. And I've always been intrigued by what makes places grow and what makes places thrive. And I'm just grateful that I have a chance to be at an institution where I get to talk to communities all the time, find out where they think they're struggling, and then we can work with them to try to find ways to get forward. And one thing, let me say one other thing on this. So I think that when we first started in this space as an institution, it was very much tied to the Community Reinvestment Act, CRA. So banks had this obligation to reinvest in communities to make sure that the capital that came from communities was redeployed in those communities. And I think over time, while CRA has been important, what's been clear is that if you just plop money into a community, but you don't have people there that are ready to use that money well, that's not going to be money that's well spent. It's not going to be money that will build on itself that you'll be able to leverage into other things. And I think, this is conjecture because I haven't interviewed all the folks who I need to on this, but I think that if you really want to see the dial move, you can't ignore all the other dimensionality that exists in communities that are needed for them to succeed. And I think once you get to that space, it's not a big leap to say, okay, now we need to very much be strategic, but more expansive in how we work with communities, how we talk about what we do, and ultimately how we act as a partner. One thing I've been trying to do is make sure when I talk about economic development, I don't talk about it in terms of CRA. So I didn't say CRA at all. I said in terms of our core mission, because I think this is part and parcel of what we need to do if we're going to succeed. And I'm going to try to get all my colleagues to start doing that as much as possible as well, so that there's no question about how important this is and how central it is to everything that we do.
So that's good. Raphael Bostic, a round of applause, and thank you so much, Raphael, for being here. For coming to Birmingham, for providing the kind of leadership that you're providing at the Federal Reserve Bank, and for really giving us a lot to think about in a community that is really on the verge of taking off in a whole new direction with new, young, millennial, invigorated leadership, and with seasoned foot soldiers who are also still profiles in courage and offer a tremendous example. We, like as you have stated, we as an institution, BCRI, are very much grounded in community. We came up through and out of the experience of this community. And as I said, we see ourselves as a museum of the future about the past. So while we're the stewards of the story of what happened here, we're really even more concerned about what happens here today and in the future. And we hope that you all will think of the Institute in that way and see us as a place where you can come and gather and convene and converse and to share and to grow, to make Birmingham continue to be the magic city that it has always been, and that is inclusive and responsive to the needs and opportunities for all people. So we are very grateful again for your being here, and hope that you will come back and send your colleagues. And I hope that all of you will come back. And I want to give a special shout out of thanks to the staff from the Federal Reserve Bank of Birmingham and of Atlanta. Took a heavy lift to get you here. So thank you all. If you would just wave and let us see who you are. And I want to particularly thank my colleagues from the Civil Rights Institute and our consultants who have helped to make this event possible. So thank you to all of you. Shout out to the BCRI team. And we think of ourselves in these times of disruption and turmoil and change and uncertainty. We think of the Institute as a place where we can gather and have civilized and informed and tempered conversations that will give us the tools and the techniques to go forward and continue to achieve excellence in our goals in whatever dimension. So again, thank you all for being here. Thank you, Raphael, and the meeting is adjourned. Thank you.